Hey guys, Matthew here once again, and I wanted to show you my couple of attempts on the Elder and the Elder Guardians. One that was pretty damn well prepared and one that was very unprepared and my first real attempt at all of it. Now it was on the Molten Strike Frostblade / Wild Strike character, and before I go into that I do just want to make sure everyone knows what the Elder and Elder Guardians are. So on your atlas, as you complete stuff in the Shaper sort of things, Elder stuff will spawn. If you keep doing maps around the Elder area in the Shaper zones, the Elder's influence will grow. Eventually, after you've killed enough and it's spread enough of the Elder influence, he will spawn his 4 Guardians and himself in 5 of your maps inside that zone. At that point, you can have as many attempts at a certain map to kill one of the Guardians. Until you've killed all 4 of them. Once you've killed all 4 of the Guardians, you can go in and do the Elder. As many attempts as you like against that certain map, but you only have the 6 portals, bear in mind. He just comes in and spawns the Guardian instead of the regular boss in those Guardian maps, and he himself is going to be in the regular boss's place in the map that he is going to be sitting in. So I will have a side-by-side comparison of my first attempt and then my second attempt. Now for the first attempts, I wasn't very well prepared. I didn't have a real chest. I was still using a tabula. I was a little bit lower of a level than I wanted to be. And for this guy in particular, I didn't actually have capped fire resist. My frames as well went to absolute shit when I first started against him, and it ultimately kind of got me killed. So a lot of these I didn't really know what I was going into, and I was just testing the waters and seeing what would happen. So I do die plenty. That was a bit of uncapped fire resist happening, and that was when he dives back with his dash. He apparently does a big molten thing up from the ground. I chased him, didn't know it would happen. And there is going to be a lot of that in these Guardian fights. They're just unpredictable attacks that you've had no real experience with up until the Guardians, so it's a steep learning curve if you do absolutely no investigating to this stuff prior to this video or prior to actually attempting them. Typically, you will get a Guardian to about 50% life, and then Elder will spawn him in a different zone altogether, and he'll be in a second phase. Sometimes it'll be several phases, like 75, 50, and 25% life. And this guy in particular, he's a bit of a clusterfuck. Just being in his melee range seems to help a lot, because then he won't do some of his attacks. And having capped fire resist and a good bit of life and a life gain on hit definitely helped take him down pretty easily, once you know what you're doing anyway. Now, when I went back a second time around, it is important to note that I had a Belly of the Beast at this point. I had about 1,000 more life, a lot more defense, a lot more damage, and I knew what I was doing. As well as that, each of the Guardians was, I think, about 1 or 2 tiers lower on the maps, so it was a bit easier. And overall, I absolutely face rolled just about all of them. It was a lot easier the second time around when I was more prepared and knew what I was coming up against. As well as that, when you have enough damage, you kind of just trivialize the fights altogether. And I didn't have a chance to take them on in the highest tier to really experience that at its fullest, but I think my character should have been able to do it just fine. So this guy did die pretty easily when I had the actual gear required for him. Now, the next guy really did struggle on my frame rate as well. I don't know if it was just something going on with my computer that day, but yeah, it was fairly framey during a lot of the attacks, so it was kind of tough to really figure out and dodge things as they were happening. Overall, he wasn't too hard though. It is just a bit of trying to run around and dodge the attacks that he does. Once again, get into melee range I think does help. And he's got this big sort of spirally dagger attack, which is kind of hard to tell what it's doing, but I think it goes in a clockwise rotation around the room for the most part. And it is somewhat achievable to avoid all of that. And the arena that you spawn in is different in different situations, I suppose. So it's not always going to be the same arena, depending on maybe where you spawn them on the map, I would think. Not too sure about that one. So I did get clipped there a couple times. Wasn't really sure how to dodge that, and I didn't really have the life to be able to dodge it. And then came back in and killed him pretty easily. The second time around was quite a bit easier. It was faced in a different arena, which was a lot more straightforward to actually avoid and run things around, and I did seem to notice they had a few different attacks. So I can't tell if this was because I was in a different tier of Guardian map, because I couldn't really tell you which tier I was in here and which tier I was in before. I thought they were all roughly the same in the yellow tier. quadrant for the part that I was doing anyway. So yeah, there were a few little different attacks and beams, and he still had his dagger attack that's kind of really hard to understand what it's doing, but for the most part it wasn't much of a problem. I then came across the poison dude, and I did have quite a lot of troubles against him. My character is not very well built or situated against fighting this guy, because for starters, you do get vastly slowed when you don't run around and you whirling blades or just move around by the tentacles on the ground, and that means that you get really slowed and it's hard to dodge any of his attacks. So it's very beneficial to have some movement speed and to run around in this fight, which is something I didn't previously know and didn't really plan for. Besides that, there is a pantheon, a minor pantheon you can grab to become immune to poison damage, and that is extremely recommended, I would say, for this fight specifically. My life regen here is currently terrible, and I'm not actually leeching or really regenning unless I'm actually attacking the boss, so it was very hard for me to actually sustain or to really even figure out what he was doing a lot of the time. So if you do have some good movement speed, you can run around in circles around him. That makes it a lot easier, especially to dodge his big attack, which he does to follow you, basically trace you as you move. So if you just keep whirling blading around, you're going to get hit by it, as you can see here. While you're also getting vastly slowed with the vines on the ground. And then if you get poisoned and you start running around, you're just dying. Then he does that sort of cascade little attack, and it's pretty hard to see, and in the heat of the moment you can easily run into it, which I did plenty, mind you. And of course my damage and life really wasn't that good for the guy at the time. Now all that said and done, at the end of the day this guy isn't that complicated. It's just when you first come across him it's pretty overwhelming, and when you don't know what to do, and if you're just whirling everywhere, you're a bit undergeared, your damage isn't great, you will probably get quite shit on. But make sure you grab the Pantheon that gives you immune to poison. That's going to help a lot, and it does require you capturing a soul, however. But it does certainly help a lot. Get some movement speed, run around quite a lot, and make sure you have enough defense to be able to take him on. Overall, he does become a bit more manageable after all that, but by God, did I struggle just quite a few times trying to figure this out and being a bit undergeared or a bit under prepared for the current situation. So it was one of the more challenging ones, one of the tougher ones for me to actually face, and yeah, it did certainly show and was somewhat embarrassing the way he just kept wrecking me and the way I just kept doing bad shit like that. But I do think it's important to see that everyone just about should struggle with a lot of these. Their first time when you don't know what you're doing and you're not terribly prepared, it is going to be tough, it is somewhat hard. I think a Scorching Ray character that has a lot of regen, like the Scorching Ray Trickster I tell you guys to play, is probably the best thing to face against these guys to start with, because it really does give you lots of room for mistakes and plenty of leeway for running around and figuring out exactly what you want to do, how you want to do it, and all that, because these Val Pact or low regen sort of characters and ones that rely on melee range to really leech back are not the greatest for the learning experience of these new bosses. So bear in mind when you're coming across your guardians and all that, what character you want to first do it with. This is the second time I went against him, and yeah, had a lot more damage, a lot more life, and it just basically meant I could brute force the fight. I didn't really have to focus on mechanics too much or any more than I did last time, but you just go in there and shit all over him. So it's not really a great example of getting better at it, just overgearing it. Now the last Guardian I faced, I think his name's Eradicator. He is notoriously the hardest guy for everyone to do, as other people have said, and it really does show. He's kind of a clusterfuck. It's kind of hard to understand what's happening, or some of his attacks being telegraphed, or even figuring out what he's actually doing. So there's quite a lot of running around in circles trying to figure out exactly what I'm dodging, how I'm dodging it, and when I'm dodging it. And on top of that, he does do quite a lot of lightning damage whenever you do actually get hit by any of this. So you can see where the Scorching Ray Trickster idea comes into play to learn some of these fights and manage to, regen quite a bit. Now he does have a very beefed up version of Tendrils there. That's probably the easiest thing to avoid, though based on the arena you actually fight him in, it might be very hard. He does also go into this invulnerable tentacle phase here, like this, and then spawn a few adds that you kill that give you some flasks back, and you can't actually attack him during that time, so you've got no choice but to kill the adds anyway. So that's pretty straightforward. But yeah, you really can't stand around for too long because you will get sniped down by some sort of, Stormcall-like attack like I did there. And then I couldn't really understand how to actually dodge these attacks here, because even when I was running around at full pace, I would sometimes get hit by them. That's not a good example here. It's in a future clip, I think. So that was really tough to understand, and also it's definitely something you want to pay close attention to, because you don't want to die on this guy. He bugs out, and then you have to start the entire run all over again. When he does this, if you die during one of these phases, you come back and he's not going to be there, and he's not going to respawn. And overall, you're just stuck in this zone. You can't leave, and he's not going to come back. You have to just start the run again. I don't know if the bug is still in the game. This was a few days ago, but it happened to me on 2 separate runs. So be careful. You really don't want to die on this guy, although he is probably the hardest guy to stay alive against, unfortunately. So this now is the proper run where I actually had gear and could kind of just brutalize him a bit. You can see the arena is different, and it does make it a bit harder to actually dodge things, the tendril attack especially. So bear in mind that's going to be a bit harder based on the arena you actually fight him in. But when you're overgeared and you can kind of get a lot of life gain on hit with the claw attacks like I did, you can for the most part actually just face tank stuff. But really having a decent amount of life and life regen goes a long way to being able to fight these guys and understand what's happening. And once again, the damage and basically just overgearing it makes it a lot easier. So when you actually come in with an unprepared amount of life and all that, it will be very hard. So bear in mind that you might just not be prepared if you're just getting way too shit on by some of these Guardians, because they are a fairly big step up from content. And then I came across the Elder for the first time, and this was my first attempt against him. Like I said, a bit undergeared and with absolutely no knowledge of the fight whatsoever, I got completely stomped. So I don't know what any of these attacks are doing, and it's pretty just up in the air as to what you're supposed to do, because you get this big bubble, and typically you want to run out of that stuff. Sometimes you're supposed to run into that stuff, so I decided to try and run out. That didn't work. Turns out you're supposed to stand inside of that sort of shit. But you can't just stand purely inside of it. You have to wait until he does his sort of attack against you and then jump into it at the very last second. Overall, the entire fight for me felt a lot less telegraphed than, say, the Shaper fight did, and the learning process and experience was a lot more brutal for me. So doing this was pretty damn hard, especially in my sort of undergeared state, I would say, and it was fairly confusing. This attack freezes you, stuns you, locks you down, and feels like it doesn't ever kill you, it just takes away most of your life. And then he's got this big spike attack for sure, and as well as that, when you do start messing things up, it gets worse and worse, because when these tentacles come out and slap you, if you don't land them in the correct places, they do drop some really shitty ground that's pretty damn hard to see and does a very severe damage over time on you. So you can't stand in that ground anymore, and if you fill up the entire arena with it, you're basically screwed. So you do have to be careful as to how you actually fight him, because in the end you could make him damn near unkillable, similar to how you do the Shaper with dropping the balls, and it's just very confusing. So this is the example of finally trying to get into the zone when he's doing his big explosion, but then I got slapped by a tentacle and I wasn't really sure what I could have done better. So yeah, once again he did his stun thing. You should, I think, be able to dodge that if you're always on the move, but I do get caught by it quite a few times in this attempt, and like I said, I don't think it kills you. Then you have the ads going all over the place. You try and kill them for a bit of extra flask charges, and the ground itself, really hard to see, but it is super dangerous, so stay away from that. These tentacles, basically, yeah, have to avoid them because they hit really hard, and then I think they do sometimes drop that ground. So once again, the big attack coming, I just barely make it into the circle, but I got nowhere to stand because there's tentacled ground everywhere. So that is basically just unplayable at that point. You do really have to be careful as to what you do with that ground, I think. There it is again. I think we dropped some extra ground, and yeah, now the arena is even less friendly. The actual attack that he does, though, with his few little spears isn't terribly dangerous. You should be able to avoid that for the most part. But I think I was just a bit undergeared and just a bit unprepared for what was coming my way. Going in on a completely blind run, I don't think you really have much chance, to be honest, because you do need to know, or there is a bit of trial and error going on with this sort of a fight. And it was damn tough and it felt pretty damn silly. But I do think I've got more of a firm grasp on it, and the second time I went in against him, it was a lot easier. But I think that was largely also because I had quite a bit more gear. So this here is the second attempt. I just popped another map and went back in, and overall it did go a lot smoother, knowing what I was in for, and I did kill him without too many events this time, I think. Though I don't completely brutalize him like I do when I'm fully geared to the teeth, but when I know what I'm actually up against, it was a lot easier, and still did end up fudging it up a few times, but it was a lot more manageable. First time around, didn't even make it to the next phase, whereas this time I will actually be able to show you another phase. And yeah, it's kind of still just an absolute clusterfuck in my opinion, but you know, a lot of people have been doing it, and maybe they've got better builds for it, but this one isn't too bad. I just went in a little underprepared and a little under-geared, I feel. So he's doing his big bubble there. You're supposed to be able to dodge it, and maybe I do. Yep, just dodged it to get inside the circle at the very last second. Still got frozen, almost died. Shaper came in to try and save me. And now I believe we go into the next phase in just a second. The next phase coming in. Nope, dead. So right as I die, we do actually start the next phase. Now this one's not really too much to write home about. Basically, Shaper is going to be trying to stop some sort of portals or power-up devices. And while he's doing that, you're supposed to stop the portals and the ads from killing him. Now you have to do this 4 times in 4 different corners, so it is a bit of a time-consuming process. And once again, if you've dropped some bad ground from before, it does make it a bit harder. It's just a bit of a time-consuming phase, and you should have enough damage under most circumstances, I think, to be able to take care of it. And at this point, I think we'll just jump through to the next attempt, one where I actually really do kill him quite quickly. So I'll leave you guys with the uncut version of the second kill, which was a lot easier. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and see you next time. Well, that's not fair. Nailed it. Okay, that's not fair. We didn't nail it. Almost killed him though, already. That's some pretty good damage. That's some pretty good life gain on hit. I mean, I'm doing a much easier version, I think. What is it? I was 75. Yesterday I was doing 79, I think. But yeah, this is so much easier than yesterday. This is timer based, huh? I don't think there's anything you can do to make this go faster. Killing the portals doesn't do shit. Because yesterday I was killing like 1 or 2 portals during the phase. Just then I killed like 8. Well, it's intense when it's higher level, where your character's more appropriate for the level of the place. But at this point I'm much higher level in this place and much Better gear slash damage than the place requires, I think. Would be my current analysis. Yeah, frames die hard with this many modern strikes. Like I'm pretty much shitting out at shit. Couldn't even tell you the numbers. Hundreds of balls. Need a dying sun, yo. Oh shit, something's about to happen. Come to me, she says. I'm here. Easy. Cyclopean coil.